Today let me share with you the 30 questions that you must ask the seller, the next door neighbour and the estate agent before buying that next investment property. Hi, my name is Tony Law from Your First Four Houses, and my channel is all about helping you replace a job-based income with just a handful of investment properties, so you can give up the day job if you wish and go and do something more interesting with your life. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that bell notification icon so that you don't miss out on any of the free content I give you each and every week. So in my online property masterclass program, I have some very advanced negotiating strategies to deal with both sellers when you're dealing directly with the seller and also when you're working with estate agents. But I wanted to give you some really good tips and some strategies here that will help you when you're dealing and negotiating on deals. And in particular, I want to give you 30 key questions that you should be asking the seller, the neighbour, and also the estate agent. Now these are going to reveal a lot of information, so let's just quickly put these over here and let's dive straight into the questions that you should be asking the seller. Before we do so though, your attitude here is going to be to build rapport with the seller. You don't want to do anything that's going to annoy them, that's going to bug them. It's all about building a really good rapport with the seller. So why don't you start off with, so can I just ask you, why are you selling? And maybe add, because it's a really lovely house. That's a great way to kind of reveal their motivations for moving on, and it might actually open up another thread of conversation. So what's your time scale? Will obviously give you an indication of how quickly they're looking to move, and they may turn around and say, well actually we need to get this moving really rather quickly, obviously, in which case you're going to follow on with, do you mind if I ask why? Or something like that. Now if you know that it's been sitting on the market for quite some time, why don't you ask them, so have you had much interest? Now I know that's generally a question that you would direct towards the estate agent, but if you built up the rapport, you can feel comfortable asking the seller, and you may well get back a negative on the amount of interest that they've had. And you can then explore that thread of a conversation. Why do they think they haven't had much interest? Now if you've already downloaded the title deeds, and I think if you've got a property in mind and it's a really interesting property, you should be downloading the title deeds, and you see that there are two people's names at the top of the title deeds, but you're talking to one person, ask the question, so is this property just in your name? I hope you don't mind me asking. If they say yes, then you've got to ask yourself some questions. Why is there two names on the title deeds but you're only talking to one person? Because if there are two names on there, well frankly both parties have got to agree to the sale. If it's tenanted, why didn't you ask, so do you have a copy of the tenancy agreement that I could have a look at please? Now you need to see a tenancy agreement. You don't want to be purchasing a property where you have a tenant that's actually going to be sitting in that property and you can't get them out. I've certainly come across properties like that. Now they may turn around and say, oh I actually don't have one to hand at the moment, which might mean that they don't have one. So you need to make sure that you've got it and it's passed to your solicitor before you go any further with a purchase on this property. Can I just ask you, what are the neighbours like? Now, honestly, this is where you may well find they tell a little bit of a porky pie, and they say they get on with everybody. Or they might turn around and say, well, actually, we got on really, really well with Sally next door on the left here. We don't really have much to do with the people on the right. Well, I would want to be talking to the people on the right, if that's the case. If there's no obvious parking space or garage that you can see with the property, ask them, so is there any allocated parking? And listen to what comes back, because what you might get back is, oh yes, of course, well we always park there. Well that's not the same as allocated parking. The fact that they always stick their car there might actually be a massive bone of contention with the neighbours. It's not the same as allocated parking. Do you know if there are any tree preservation orders on the property? Now you would want to ask this question, obviously if there are trees, but perhaps more importantly if you're thinking about building out any extension or developing the property in any way. It's obviously easy to find this out on site, but if you're there, just ask the question. Have they carried out, if they've carried out any extensions, you might also want to ask, so can I just confirm, did you get planning permission for this? And also, do you have a copy of the building regs certificate? Now, it's true to say that they may have carried out any extensions as part of permitted development on the site, which is fine. If so, you need to check that, but they must have a building regs document. If they don't have one of those, it kind of suggests that they might actually have maybe not done it competently. So again, you may need to pursue that line of conversation further. This is always a bit of a cheeky one. Or do you mind if I just turn on the taps just to check the water pressure? Bit cheeky, but if you're turning this place into an HMO, you need to know that there's the water pressure there. One of my HMOs is an 8-bed HMO with all ensuite bathrooms. Frankly, if I did not have the water pressure there, I would really have struggled to actually get this place to work efficiently with all the showers going at the same time. Yes, you can pump it, but that's not ideal. On the subject of pump, when you turn the water on, listen, is there a pump going? Now, if it's a flat, you need to ask questions like, who are the block managing agents? You're then going to go home and Google them, find out a little bit more about them. Also ask them, do you know if they've got a sinking fund? Now, if you're not aware what a sinking fund is, every block managing agent should have a fund into which the leaseholders put money. So when the roof blows off, or when a fence comes down, or when there's damp that needs to be remedied, they don't come to each individual leaseholder with their hand out looking for funds. They put it pooled inside a sinking fund. You need to ask, what are the service charges? Again, thinking about if it's a flat here. Now, one of my properties is in London and the service charges are really very high. Dare I say, maybe that's, in fact I know it's a negative if you're looking at selling this property on. Maybe not so if you're just renting it out. But the service charges, if they're high, should have an impact on how much you actually pay for this property. Now, this is one that was given to me by Simon Zucci. It's an awesome question, and it is. So let me ask you, what's the lowest you'd be willing to accept and still be happy? It is a killer question, and you've got to use it appropriately if you're dealing directly with the seller. And honestly, you might get back a lower figure than you actually had for buying the property in the first place. So what sort of questions should you be asking the neighbour? Now, first of all, your attitude with the neighbour naturally needs to be warm and friendly, and you need to kind of go in from the perspective that you're seeking their advice. You're really hoping that they can give you a little bit of advice on the property because you're going to be moving in probably next door. People love to give advice, and if you ask these types of questions, you're probably going to get some really quite accurate answers. Maybe, dare I say it, in comparison to if you asked the seller these questions. Is it a nice area to live? Now, that may sound like a bonkers question to ask, but it's a great one to start off with, and you may get back some information that you weren't expecting. Do you know if there are any problems with any of the neighbours? Now, that's a bit of a challenging question to ask. But in certain instances, if you build up some rapport and you're showing a level of concern about the area, they may turn around and say, oh no, it's brilliant, absolutely no problems in that regard, or the other way. So ask the question if you can, and you can follow up with, so what's the area like at night? Now again, you may get some information back that you don't want to hear, but you need to also, by the way, be travelling out to this place in the evening and kind of walking around it in the evening and finding out how it feels. Are there any traffic or parking problems around the place? Now, in some parts of the country, London or Bristol, we're going to be moving up to Bristol, and there are some beautiful properties in Bristol, but my goodness me, parking in some areas is just ridiculous, frankly. So ask the question and see what comes back. And following on from that, so what is the kind of public transport like around here? You know, what are the buses like? Now again, you're probably going to get honest information or an honest answer that you might not have got if you were asking the seller that particular question. And again, along a similar lines, do they know if there are any sort of new building works that are going on, any sort of development going on? Now the seller might not want you to know about the new conversations that are currently being had about a new build that's going up close by. But maybe it's the buzz that's going around the close or the road where you're looking to buy. Now I know that I've sort of charged through these questions, but ultimately if you're having a chat, maybe over 20 minutes for example, you can kind of thread these questions in. This one's really cheeky, And I feel a bit weird even sharing it with you, because when I give it to you now, you're going to go, what? But it does work, and I have used it. So here's a real cheeky question that you could ask, maybe towards the back end of the conversation, after you built up some real rapport. Do you mind if I ask you, I've heard kind of through the grapevine that there was a little bit of a minor dispute between the neighbours. Can I just ask you about that? Now, you could ask that question even if you've not heard of anything, which is kind of what I'm implying here. And if there is something that's been out there in the road that you're looking at, you may get them come straight back to you and say, well, actually, yes, there was an issue where number 13 was causing a big problem and we had to have a word with them, blah, blah, blah. Again, I know it's a real cheeky question, and I do recognise you're probably not going to ask it, but I have asked it in the past, and it's amazing what it can reveal. So let's talk about the agent. What kind of questions should you be asking the agent? Well, let's start off with your attitude here. You're talking to an estate agent, they're a professional person. You need to be professional, you need to be reliable, you need to do what you need to do what you say. So if you say you're going to do something, you need to follow through and do that thing. You don't want to mess these people around. They quite rightly have a livelihood that they need to earn. And despite what some people think, I think estate agents work bloody hard, frankly, for the money that they're being paid. And so we should not be messing these people around. But coming across in a professional, reliable way, doing what you say, will actually go a long way for them recommending you as a potential buyer. So maybe you could start off by asking a question. So do you mind if I ask you, how long has this place been on the market? Now, you should already know that, to be perfectly honest with you. If you don't know that, there are a couple of ways that you can find that out. But you do need to establish how long that property's been on the market, ideally before asking that question. If it has been on the market for quite a while, why don't you ask them, so why do you think it hasn't sold yet? Now, the truth is the agent probably knows perfectly well why it hasn't sold yet. It could be price. It could be the configuration. It could be the fact that it's very dated and they're still wanting quite high money for it. Maybe a little bit below what it'd be worth if it was perfect, but they're still asking a little bit too much. But they will know. Do you know, how keen are they to sell? Now, that's not like saying, are they a motivated seller, which you would never ask a question like that. But how keen are they to sell will actually get you some information that you may not be expecting. Well, actually, you know, they do need to sell quite quickly. Maybe you can then follow a conversation up along that thread. So how did they come up with the asking price is another great question to ask. You're asking, how did they come up with the asking price? Because it may actually be them or that actually dictated the price to the agent. So if you get a sense that that's what they're kind of thinking, that they actually dictated a higher price, you could follow it up with, so do you mind if I ask you, what do you think it's really worth? And in some instances, if you build a high level of rapport, they will tell you. So has anything sold recently that's similar? Will reveal the kind of research that they're aware of other properties in the area that are close comparables. It needs to be a close comparable. So by that I mean a recent sale of a very, very similar property. And this will help you understand how they've actually got to their valuation. Is it freehold or leasehold? Now, if it's a flat, it's almost certainly going to be leasehold, but not definitely. And if it's not clear in the paperwork, you need to be clear on that. If it is leasehold, always follow up with, do you know how many years are left on the lease? Now, the agent must know that. If they're a competent agent, they must be able to answer that question. And if it's lower than say 90 years, 80 years, well then that's going to have an impact on the offer that you're going to be putting forwards, and you need to follow up with ways of extending the lease, which I won't go into here. Can I just ask, is it actually on with multiple agents, or is it just yourself that's marketing this property? Now, why would you want to ask that question? Well, if it is on with other agents, it does certainly suggest there's a higher level of motivation from the seller, and they're going to perhaps have to acknowledge that, maybe subtly acknowledge it, but acknowledge it nonetheless. But it also tells you very clearly that you're aware, that they're aware, that you're aware, that they need to sell this, or maybe Joe Blogg's houses down the road might sell it. And of course, the person that sells it is the one that actually gets the commission, as of course you're fully aware. And you might want to ask this question as well. And this isn't this isn't fake. You need to be sincere about this. Can I just ask you, if I buy it and hand it back to you to rent, what kind of rent do you think that I would get? Now, obviously, again, I never mess agents around. I don't like people that do mess agents around, frankly. So ask this question if you're sincerely thinking about handing it back to them, because you want them to manage it. Now, I do feel quite strongly these people are business people, so especially if you're dealing with independent estate agents, and I'll always fly the flag for independence, because often you're dealing with the owner of the business. And so if they're thinking that they may actually genuinely get the property back to rent and therefore create another income from actually handling that property, might they be look at you more favourably than somebody who's actually just going to buy it and live in it themselves? So there you go. There are 30 key questions that if you ask the seller, the next door neighbour and the agent will honestly enable you to push your negotiating forwards. As I say, in our online property masterclass, we go into a lot more depth on these subjects, but I wanted to give you this because I sincerely hope that it will help you out. And the last thing I'm going to say before signing off, if you haven't checked out my completely free mini course, you've got to do so. It will teach you exactly how to build a portfolio without needing to put loads of money into each deal. And it's coming up on the right hand side of your screen right about now.